Hey guys, tonight we're drifting into the chilliest bedtime tale imaginable. Picture this, vast Siberian tundras stretching like an endless white blanket. Under a sky so clear you could almost reach up and pluck the stars like frozen berries, the wind whispering secrets through brittle grasses. And somewhere in the distance, the faint crack of ice under the weight of ancient footsteps. It's the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, the kind where your breath hangs in the air like a ghost, reminding you that survival out there wasn't just a skill. It was poetry in motion. And here's the cheeky reality check. If you think your morning commute in the snow is brutal, imagine paddling across a frozen sea with nothing but a sealskin boat and a prayer to the North Star. You probably won't survive this in your pajamas, but hey, that's why we're cozy here instead. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing where you're tuning in from. Maybe a sleepy Seattle at 2 a.m. or a balmy Brisbane pushing midnight. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine, if you will, the year around 3000 BC. Though pinning down exact dates is like trying to nail jelly to a wall in this frozen world. We're in the heart of Siberia, that sprawling, unforgiving expanse where the earth seems to shrug off warmth like an old coat. The people here, the ancestors of what we'd come to know as the Inuit, weren't just scraping by. They were masters of the margin, turning the land's hostility into a rhythm they could hum along to. Picture them, bundled in furs that smelled of smoke and sea salt, their faces etched with lines from squinting into blizzards, hands calloused from gripping bone tools that doubled as art. These weren't nomads wandering aimlessly. They were hunters in perfect sync with the pulse of the tundra, reading the subtle shifts in wind, like a lover's sigh, knowing when the caribou herds would thunder across the plains because the raven started cawing a certain way at dawn. The winters? Oh, they were the great equalizer, blanketing everything in a hush so profound you could hear your own heartbeat echoing off the snowdrifts. Temperatures plummeted to what we'd call why bother. With life levels 40 below, easy. With winds that howled like mischievous spirits testing your resolve. But these folks? They laughed in the face of frostbite. Well, not literally, laughed more like a wry chuckle over a steaming bowl of seal stew. The kind that warms you from the inside out while the outside world tries to freeze you solid. And speaking of stew, let's talk about their ingenuity. They built semi-subterranean homes, dug into the permafrost like burrows in a dream, lined with mammoth bones for insulation because why not recycle the giants of the Ice Age? It was cozy down there, the air thick with the scent of drying fish, and the low murmur of stories being spun by firelight. Flames dancing shadows on walls that whispered of endurance. Mainstream history tells us that these Siberian groups, part of the broader Paleo-Siberian cultures, relied on a seasonal round that was as predictable as the aurora's glow summer hunts for fish in thawing rivers, autumn gatherings for berry picking under skies painted pink, and winter hunkering down with traps set for foxes whose pelts became currency in barters that spanned clans. They followed the reindeer migrations, those majestic beasts with antlers like crowns, across landscapes that shifted from boggy marsh to iron-hard ice. It was a life of quiet observation, watching how the lichens on rocks changed color to signal spring's sneaky approach, or how the thickness of river ice predicted safe crossings. No apps, no GPS, just pure, unfiltered attunement to the Earth's moods. But here's a quirky tidbit that might make you smile in your warm bed. Some archaeologists have unearthed tiny ivory carvings from these sites. Not just practical tools, but whimsical little figures of birds with human heads or seals playing drums. Fringe theories even suggest these were early totem toys, passed from parent to child to teach navigation through play. Like a prehistoric version of Pokemon, but with actual survival stakes. Imagine a kid giggling over a walrus whistle while learning to mimic whale calls to lure dinner. Adorable, right? And who knows? Maybe that's where the magic started. Those small acts of whimsy forging bonds stronger than any storm. Historians still argue whether these early Siberians had a fully developed shamanistic tradition by this point, or if the spiritual whispers came later, woven in during the migrations. Some say the shamans were already dream-walking with animal spirits, consulting ravens for advice on hunts, while others chalk it up to practical folklore stories to keep the young ones quiet during the long nights. Either way, it added a layer of mystery to their days, turning the mundane into the mystical. You'd wake to the soft thud of snow falling from a mammoth tusk roof, stretch under a blanket of reindeer hide that itched just enough to remind you you're alive, and step out into a world where every breath was a small victory. Life wasn't all poetic hardship, though. There were moments of levity, like the communal feasts after a successful hunt, where the air filled with the sizzle of roasting ptarmigan over open flames, grease dripping onto the snow with a hiss that sounded like applause. Elders would recount tales of trickster foxes outsmarting bears, their voices rising and falling like the wind outside, drawing peals of laughter that warmed the soul more than any fire. And let's be honest, in a place where daylight could shrink to a few hours, you had to find joy in the cracks. Maybe a sly joke about a hunter who mistook his own shadow for a polar bear, earning groans and grins around the circle. Better than being the bear, someone would quip, and the tent would erupt in that gentle, weary mirth that says, "We're still here." As the years blurred into generations, this attunement deepened. Families weren't just blood, they were networks of knowledge, elders passing down the art of reading, cloud formations that promised calm seas or brewing tempests. Women, often the unsung architects, wove nets from sinew that could snag salmon mid-leap, their fingers flying in rhythms that echoed the heartbeat of the land. Children learned early, trailing parents on snowshoes carved from antler, ears tuned to the subtle crunch underfoot that meant thin ice ahead. It was a world where survival was collaborative, a tapestry of shared glances and unspoken cues. Pass the harpoon, watch the stars, trust the gut. Yet, beneath this harmony, a restlessness stirred. The horizons called, not with thunderous roars, but with the quiet pull of curiosity, whispers of lands beyond the Strait, where the ice might part like a curtain to reveal new hunting grounds, new stories to claim. The Big Dipper, that faithful old wagon in the sky, seemed to wheel a little wider each season, hinting at paths untraveled. And Polaris? The North Star, steady as a mother's gaze, became more than a beacon, it was a promise. Etched into the collective memory like a scar that doesn't fade, these people, forged in Siberia's crucible, weren't content with the known. They felt the tug of destiny, subtle as a current underfoot. Joke time, because even in the deep freeze, we need a thaw. Ever wonder why these ancestors never invented central heating? Probably because they were too busy inventing the world's first ice bucket challenge, voluntary, daily, and with zero social media glory. Or how about this? Their favorite pickup line. "Hey, is that a mammoth in your pocket? Or are you just glad to see me after the thaw? Okay, one more for the road?" Why did the Siberian hunter break up with the tundra? It was too cold-hearted, and he needed someone who wouldn't ghost him come winter. Lighten up, folks. Even legends had their dad jokes. As the Great Migration's call grew from murmur to melody, these resilient souls began to prepare. Boats sketched in the sand, stars mapped on cave walls with ochre and fat lamps flickering low. The land that had shaped them now felt like a cradle ready to rock them toward the edge of the world. And in those quiet evenings, as the fire popped and the wind sighed outside, you could almost hear it, the first verses of epic songs yet to be sung, threads of starlit destiny weaving tighter with each passing night. Those flickering fat lamps in the Siberian caves cast long, wavering shadows that danced like curious spirits across the ochre-scratched walls, where crude lines traced the arcs of constellations. Simple strokes that held the weight of worlds unseen. But it wasn't the drawings that truly captured the magic. It was the voices, low and rhythmic, passing the knowledge from grandparent to grandchild, like a well-worn fur cloak, warm with generations of use. In the hush of those long nights, when the world outside was a symphony of cracking ice and sighing winds, the stars weren't just lights in the sky. They were ancestors, guides, gossips of the cosmos, whispering directions to those bold enough to listen. Polaris, that steadfast nail in the northern heavens, became the family's North Star in more ways than one, a constant amid the chaos, the point around which everything else wheeled, reminding you that no matter how lost you felt, home, or at least direction, was always up there winking back. Picture a cluster of them gathered under the smoke-hazed roof of a winter dwelling, the air thick with the earthy tang of burning seal blubber, eyes heavy-lidded but sharp as they tilted toward the vent hole in the ceiling. An elder, voice gravelly from years of shouting over gales, would point with a gnarled finger wrapped in sinew cord, tracing the Big Dipper's handle like a hunter's arc. "See there," they'd murmur, the words rolling out soft as fresh snow. The Great Bear's tail, dipping low to scoop the frozen river of the Milky Way. Follow its paw, and you'll find the drinking gourd that leads to the great white lands beyond. It wasn't rote memorization. It was lore, etched into the marrow like the scars from a harpoon slip, shared in snippets during the endless dark, when sleep was a luxury and stories were the currency of sanity. Kids, bundled in oversized parkas of caribou, hide that smelled faintly of pine resin from summer camps, would mimic the motions, their small hands slicing the air, giggling when they got the dipper's curve wrong and earned a playful cuff. Modern aside, it's like learning constellations from an app today, but swap the screen glow for firelight flicker, and the stakes? Eternal freeze if you botch the reading. This celestial schooling went deeper than bedtime astronomy. It was survival's syllabus, chapter and verse. Mainstream accounts from archaeologists digging through those permafrost tombs confirm it. By 3000 BC, these proto-Inuit peoples had a sophisticated star lore that intertwined with their seasonal calendars, using the Pleiades' rise to time whale hunts, or Orion's belt to predict caribou crossings. No telescopes, no star charts, just naked eyes trained from cradle to grave, spotting the subtle shift of Vegas position to gauge latitude, or the dipper's seasonal spin to mark solstice feasts. It turned the night sky into a living almanac, pages flipping with the Earth's slow tumble, where a misplaced star could mean arriving at a seal rookery weeks late, stomachs rumbling like distant thunder. And oh, the sensory poetry of it all, the crisp bite of night air sneaking through the tent flaps, as you stepped out for a clearer view, cheeks stinging like they've been kissed by frost sprites, the crunch of snow under mucklucks that muffled your steps like a conspirator's hush. Up there, the stars hung so low you swore you could hook one with a thrown spear, their light piercing the velvet black in pinpricks that felt personal, intimate. The Big Dipper wasn't abstract. It was the old uncle who always brought the best dried fish. Reliable, but with a twisty handle that tricked the unwary. Polaris? The stern aunt, immovable, judging your every eastward glance. Families would huddle on clear nights, breath clouding in communal puffs, pointing and naming until the sky felt like a family reunion, crowded, comforting, full of inside jokes about that one comet that streaked by last equinox, leaving everyone whispering about omens over morning broth. But let's sprinkle in a quirky tidbit to keep things from getting too starry-eyed. Fringe lore from some ethnographic digs, hints at star songs, melodic chants where each constellation had its own tune, hummed to mimic the wind's howl through ice. Flows think whale calls meets lullaby. Used not just for navigation, but to cool down auroras for extra light on moonless nights. Imagine belting out a throaty dirge to the dipper, and poof, the northern lights shimmy into view like shy dancers at a party. Scholars pooh-pooh it as romanticized folklore, but wouldn't you try it on a camping trip? Next time you're stargazing with a thermos of cocoa, give it a warble, worst case. You scare off the neighbors. Historians still argue whether this star knowledge was purely practical, born of necessity in the endless night, or if it carried a spiritual undercurrent from the start. Were the stars mere tools or portals to the spirit world where ancestors plotted the migration routes? One camp says it was all about calories and compass points. The other insists on shamanic visions, dreams where Polaris spoke in tongues of ice. Either way, it wove into the fabric of daily life, turning every clear evening into a classroom, every cloudy one a test of memory. You'd recite the paths aloud while scraping hides by lamplight. The rhythmic scrape, underscoring the words like a drumbeat. From the bear's paw to the dragon's tail, then hook left at the hunter's knee. It stuck, because forgetting wasn't an option. The unknown tugged like a riptide, promising new grounds but delivering death to the unprepared. As the pull grew stronger, star maps in the mind became more than guides. They were inheritances, passed with the gravity of a final breath. A father to his son, over a shared pipe of willow bark that puffed sweet smoke into the chill. Remember, boy, the dipper dips twice, once for the Strait, once for the soul. Mothers wove it into cradle songs, soft coos that lulled babes while imprinting the heavens' order, the melody lingering like a half-remembered dream. And in quieter moments, alone on a ridge overlooking the frozen Chukchi Sea, you'd lie back on a bed of snow that cradled you like an old friend, tracing the patterns with frost-numbed fingers, feeling the vastness press down gentle as a blanket. It was humbling, exhilarating, the universe reduced to a handful of friendly lights, plotting your course across waters that swallowed lesser men whole. Jokes to chase away the cosmic chill, because even stargazers need a snicker. Why did the Big Dipper break up with Polaris? It said, "You're too fixed. I need someone who can handle a little spin." Or this, "What's a Siberian navigator's favorite pickup line? Are you the North Star? Because you've got my whole world pointing your way now about that Strait crossing." And for the third, light as a meteor trail. Ever notice how constellations are like family trees? Lots of branching, but everyone's connected by a few awkward bears and hunters who can't decide if they're dipping or pouring. Chuckle softly. Let it settle like snow. These silent guides didn't shout their secrets, they murmured, patient as the tide, etching themselves into the family's core until the migration wasn't a leap of faith, but a stroll charted in light. The boats in the sand grew from sketches to half-built frames, lashed with whalebone, while the cave walls filled with more arcs, more promises. The wind outside carried the salt tang of the Strait, teasing like a half-heard invitation. And in the fire's glow, eyes lifted northward, where the stars wheeled on, indifferent witnesses to the human itch to follow. That salt tang on the wind wasn't just a tease. It was a siren call, curling through the smoke vents like fingers beckoning the bold, carrying the faint, briny promise of waters that could cradle or crush dreams in equal measure. And so, in those lengthening twilights when the sun skimmed the horizon like a shy lover, the hands that once traced stars now turned to timber and tendon, shaping vessels from the land's own leavings, skin, boats, and kayaks that weren't mere crafts, but floating fate, sown with whispers of what if, and lashed tight against the never again. Picture it. A work site on a pebbled beach, where the Chukchi's grey waves lapped lazy at driftwood piles, the air humming with the rhythmic thwack of adzes on bone-hard willow, and the low chant of builders sinking their strokes like a heartbeat tuned to the tide. These weren't weekend DIY projects. They were rituals, passed down with the gravity of a last will, where every stitch held a story, every frame a vow to the unknown. The process started humble, scavenging the tundras, cast-offs like opportunistic ravens, driftwood bleached silver by salt and sun, tumbling in from storms that raged across the Pacific's edge, twisted into shapes that seemed preordained, as if the sea itself had carved them for this purpose. Families would fan out at low tide, mucklucks sinking into the muck with soft sucks. Eyes scanning for the straight-grained spruce or the flexible alder that bent without breaking, the kind that promised to flex with the waves rather than snap like a fool's resolve. Haul them back on sleds creaking under the load, the wood still damp with ocean kiss, smelling of kelp and secrets, and lay them out under the open sky where the Big Dipper, remember that old dipper from our starlit chats, could oversee the birth like a nosy godparent. Modern aside, it's a far cry from ordering kayak kits on Amazon Prime. But hey, nothing beats that zero-waste vibe. Turning beach trash into transcontinental treasure. Mainstream digs along the Siberian coast back this up. By 3000 BC, these proto-Inuit boat builders had perfected the umiak, the big skin boat for hauling families and gear, framed with lashed walrus ribs that curved graceful as a whale's smile, then skinned over with bearded seal hides scraped clean of every scrap of blubber until they gleamed taut and waterproof. It was communal artistry, women chewing the edges soft for a watertight seal, their jaws working in quiet unison like a chorus of contented cows, while men lashed the gunnels with twisted sinew that stretched but never frayed. The kayak, slim akin to the umiak, was the soloist's dream. A needle-nosed hunter's ride, decked with sealskin so supple it molded to the paddler's every shift, propelled by double-bladed oars that whispered through water like secrets shared in the dark. These weren't flashy. They were functional poetry, light enough to portage over ice hummocks that clawed at your calves, sturdy enough to shrug off bergs the size of houses. Sensory overload in the best way, the sharp tang of fresh-tanned hides hitting your nostrils like a wake-up slap, mingling with the smoky char of fat-rendered glue, bubbling in clay pots over driftwood fires that popped and sighed. Fingers, raw from punching all holes, would ache with that good kind of burn, the kind that says you're alive. And so is this thing you're birthing. Test launches at dusk, when the Strait mirrored the fading stars in glassy calm, sent ripples out like breaths held collective. The boat rocking gentle under load, testing its mettle with a family piled aboard, kids peering over the sides with wide eyes that caught the last light. It bobbed, it breathed, it promised, and in the slip of it into the shallows, slick with kelp strands that clung like reluctant lovers, you felt the hum, that deep vibration of wood and hide alive with potential, ready to carry you where the horizon dared you to go. But let's not gloss over the quirks that made it all feel a tad enchanted. Fringe tales from coastal elders, echoed in fragmented petroglyphs, speak of spirit breaths, blown into the frames during construction, puffing life from lungs warmed by song into the hollows, so the boats could sniff currents or dream of safe passages. One story goes that a particularly cantankerous kayak once refused a hungover paddler, tipping him thrice until he sobered up with a seaside apology. Quirky? Absolutely. But in a world where your ride's reliability meant life or a watery shrug, who wouldn't hedge with a little animism? Imagine whispering sweet nothings to your vessel over a midnight mend. Easy now, old girl. We've got stars to chase. Historians still argue whether these boats evolved purely from local ingenuity, or borrowed a trick or two from earlier Pacific crossers. Did the skin-stretching tech drift in with trade winds, or was it homegrown, born of watching whales breach and thinking, we can do that, but smaller? The debate simmers like stew on a slow fire, with bone harpoon finds tilting one way and linguistic echoes the other. But it adds that delicious uncertainty, like seasoning you can't quite place. Either way, didn't matter to the builders. They worked with what the land gave, turning potential peril into portable home. As the frames took shape, so did the Resolve clan's pooling labor like shared breath, laughter bubbling up when a lashing slipped and sent someone tumbling into the foam, whitecaps tickling like playful pups. "There goes our captain," they'd tease, hauling the sodden soul aboard with grunts and grins, the mishap becoming legend fodder for the next fire circle. Women, with their unerring eyes for tension, would test the skins by drumming fingers across them, listening for the drum-tight twang that sang ready, their calluses singing back in harmony. Kids, ever the apprentices, fetched water in birch-bark pails that sloshed rhythmic, or practiced lashing with willow withes, their small knots surprisingly sure, earning nods that swelled chests prouder than any trophy. And the tools? Oh, the poetry and the practical. Ulus, those curved women's knives with handles worn smooth as river stones, slicing hides with a whisper that belied their bite. Adzes hafted to antler, chipping wood in curls that flew like startled birds. Glue from boiled hooves, sticky and stubborn, sealing seams against the strait's sly leaks. It was also tactile, so immediate, the splinters pricking like tiny warnings, the sweat beading cold in the chill air, evaporating into mist that joined the greater fog rolling in like a soft blanket. By full moon, when Polaris hung high and judgmental, the first umiak would slide free, its shadow long on the wet sand, a silhouette of ambition against the silvered waves. Jokes to keep the glue from setting too serious, because building boats in the Arctic, that's comedy gold waiting to happen. Why did the kayak refuse to go out in the storm? It said, "I'm not ready for that kind of commitment. Too much drama. Not enough driftwood. Or this gem." Ever hear about the seal hide that ghosted the builder? Turns out it was just too slippery to commit, leaving him high and dry on the beach. And for the trifecta, light as a paddler's stroke. What's a Siberian boat's favourite music? Anything with a good current chart keeps things flowing without all the rapids. Let that chuckle settle like foam on the tide. These vessels of fate weren't built in a vacuum. They were extensions of the self, whispering back the builder's hopes as they bobbed in the shallows, hulls curving like smiles toward the dark water. The salt tang grew sharper, the star's wheel turned insistent, and with each completed craft umiak for the haul, kayak for the hunt, the itch to launch became a thrum, steady as a paddle's dip. Families gathered at dawn's first blush, hands tracing the smooth gunwales one last time, feeling the promise pulse beneath, ready to gamble the strait on starlight and sealskin. The horizon waited, blurred and beckoning, and in the creak of lashing settling, you could almost hear it, the first splashes of a journey that would etch their names into ice forever. The first splashes weren't grand symphonies of adventure, no crashing waves or triumphant horns from the ether, but tentative dips, oars kissing the water with a soft ploosh that echoed like a held breath. Finally released, the umiaks and kayaks nudging free from the pebbled shallows into the Bering Strait's embrace, where the current tugged sly as a pickpocket in a crowd. Dawn's half-light smeared the sky in bruised purples and golds, the air so crisp it crackled in your lungs, carrying the metallic tang of brine mixed with the faint, greasy smoke from farewell fires smouldering on the beach behind. Families clustered in the big boats, gear lashed tight amid the rustle of hides and the muffled whimpers of wide-eyed young ones, while solo hunters slipped into their sleek kayaks like shadows merging with the mist, paddles rising and falling in that hypnotic rhythm that said, it was the gamble of gambles, this launch across 50-odd miles of water that could turn from glassy mirror to snarling beast in a heartbeat, betting the farm, or in this case, the entire clan's future, on ancestral whispers etched in starlight and sealskin. Oh, the sensory rush of it. That moment when the shore's solidity fades to a memory, the boat's gentle rock sinking with your pulse like an old friend settling in for a long talk. Salt spray misted your face, cool and insistent, beading on lashes heavy with the weight of what-ifs. While the paddles drip-drip painted silver trails on the dark surface, the only sound besides the low hum of murmured encouragements rippling through the fleet. Polaris hung ahead like a lighthouse keeper's lantern, steady and smug, while the Big Dipper, our trusty old pourer from those caveside lessons tilted just so, spilling its imaginary stream toward the unseen Alaskan coast. Modern aside, if you've ever taken a ferry in fog, amp that up by a factor of no life jackets, no radar, just vibes and a vague hunch from Grandma's ghost, and you've got the gist thrilling in hindsight, pants wetting in the moment. Mainstream evidence from submerged sites off the Siberian rim confirms the straits were navigable then, around 3000 BC, with sea levels lower and ice bridges forming seasonal highways. But these seafarers didn't wait for handouts. They struck out in open water, umiaks laden with stone lamps, dried fish hauls that smelled like concentrated ocean, and bone tools wrapped in oiled grass for the long haul. It was a flotilla of fate, perhaps a dozen crafts strung out in loose formation. The lead kayak scouting leads through pancake ice that bobbed like lazy lily pads, cracking under prods from harpoon poles with reports sharp as whips. Women at the sterns steered with quiet authority, their calls cutting the din, left on the bear's paw, echoing the star lore that now lived in muscle memory, while men powered the strokes, shoulders rolling in unison, sweat tracing icy paths down backs bared to the chill for freedom's sake. The Strait didn't roll out the welcome mat. It tested, prodded, like a cranky innkeeper sizing up late arrivals. Currents swirled unpredictable, pulling boats sideways toward gravel spits that loomed sudden from the murk, forcing frantic back paddles that burned thighs like fire under snow. Fog banks rolled in thick as wool, swallowing the horizon whole, leaving only the faint silhouettes of sister crafts and the urgent toot of conch shell signals low moos that carried farther than shouts, mimicking whale calls to blend with the sea's own chorus. And the cold? It wasn't just weather. It was a living thing, wrapping tendrils around exposed skin, numbing fingers until the paddle felt like hefting a frozen log, breath fogging in plumes that iced brows and moustaches into crystalline masks. Yet amid the strain, those gentle asides slipped in a shared glance over a shoulder, a nod that said, "We've got this." The boat's creak, harmonizing with the waves, hush like a lullaby for the nerves. Quirky fringe bit to warm the chills. Some oral traditions, pieced from later Inuit songs. Whisper of Strait guardians. Said to nudge wayward boats back on course if you toss them a song fragment mid-paddle. One yarn tells of a hunter who, adrift in whiteout, warbled a dipper ditty and woke to find his kayak beached on kelp, a fresh-caught fish flopping beside like payment. Superstition or savvy seamanship? Who cares, it spiced the slog, turning terror into tail-spinning fodder for the fires ahead. Historians still argue whether these crossings were one-way tickets or round-trip trades, with artifact matches across the strait, suggesting back-and-forth barters in ivory and obsidian, or if it was a bold, irreversible leap into the blue. The debate swirls like those fogs, with radiocarbon dates pulling one way and linguistic drifts the other, but it underscores the audacity. Not fleeing famine, but chasing plenty, wagering kin and culture on a watery roulette as hours bled into the push. The gamble sharpened ice floes carved from distant glaciers with groans like waking giants, tumbling into paths and forcing detours that sapped strength, boats scraping hulls roar on berg edges that glittered treacherous under starlight's reveal. Night fell soft but absolute, the sky a dome of ink, pricked with familiars. Polaris your anchor, the dipper your dipstick for progress, its handle hooking lower with each league gained. Huddled in umiaks, families shared body heat under shared robes, the press of limbs a comfort against the void, whispers of star stories lulling the littlest ones, while elders scanned the dark for glows that might mean land or just phosphorescent tricks. A sudden lurch, a rogue wave slapping broadside would jolt hearts to throats, water sluicing over gunwales in icy sheets that pooled ankle deep, bailed frantic with horn cups that clattered like dice in the gods' game. Laughter, bless it, found cracks even here. When a kid's toy harpoon snagged a paddle, sending it spinning overboard, the father's mock growl of, "That's our ticket home, you pint-sized pirate," drew chuckles muffled by chattering teeth. The mishap retold in exaggerated waves till it bonded them tighter than any rope. Hunters in kayaks, solitary specks, traded hoots across the water. Owl calls for all clear. Raven calls for pull harder, turning isolation into a game of echoes. And the sea itself joined in, bioluminescent plankton sparking under blades like underwater fireworks, a fleeting magic that said, "See, even the deep's got a sense of humour." But the real bets played out in the quiet tolls. Mussels screaming mutiny by the third watch. Blistered palms wrapped in hide scraps that chafed worse than bare. The gnaw of thirst eased by snowmelt sipped from mittens. Tasting of glove and grit. One craft lagged, caught in a whirlpool's lazy spin, its crew's shouts fading to frantic paddles until a towline from the rear boat snaked out, sinew taut as a bowstring, hauling them free with grunts that echoed the collective exhale. It was that wisdom ancestral star-fed that paid dividends, reading the dippers port attack against headwinds that howled mocking from the east, or spotting Vegas wink to gauge the strait's width, trimming sails improvised from spare hides that bellied like hopeful lungs, jokes to paddle through the peril, light as spray. Why did the Bering Strait make such a lousy host? It kept giving everyone the cold shoulder and the icy stare. Or this, ever wonder the Umiak's motto during a squall? We're all in the same boat, literally, and it's leaking. And for the splashy finish, what's a migrant's favourite strait dance? The polar polka, 2 steps forward, 1 slip on ice, repeat till shore, let 'em ripple soft, easing the edge. By the strait's gut. When false dawns teased without delivering, the gamble teetered, exhaustion blurring vision. The waters slap a metronome to mounting doubt. Yet Polaris pulled unyielding, the dipper dipped its promise, and faint, a smudge on the eastern rim. Land, or longings lie. The boats converged, a ragged V of determination, oars biting deeper. The creak of wood and whisper of wind carrying them over the threshold. Eternity's edge had been danced with, waves tamed to reluctant allies, and in the salt-stung eyes lifting to the stars, you saw it. The bet half won. The Tundra's call now a roar, pulling them toward blizzards that waited like old friends, horizons ready to unfold their frozen secrets. That smudge on the eastern rim sharpened into substance as the boats nosed closer. The Bering's grip loosening, like a reluctant host waving off guests with one last nip of wind, the hulls scraping onto a gravel spit that crunched welcome under keels, worn thin from the night's tussle. But landfall wasn't the fairy tale dock. It was a ragged hello from Alaska's edge, where the strait bled into a tundra that stretched indifferent. Under skies already bruising with the promise of weather that didn't ask permission, families spilled out, legs wobbling like newborn foals on the uneven shore, hands pressing into wet pebbles that bit cold through mitts, the air shifting from sea's briny slap to the drier, sharper bite of inland frost, laced with the faint, mineral whiff of permafrost, exhaling secrets long frozen. Gear tumbled ashore in a clatter of bone and baleen. Umiaks hauled high to dry on racks improvised from driftwood arms, while kayaks nestled like tired hounds, their hides steaming faintly in the weak sun's caress. It was the pause before the plunge, that deceptive calm where you catch your breath, mend a seam, and eye the horizons thickening grey with the wariness of someone who's just bet the house and won barely. Yet the Arctic, ever the drama queen, didn't let the triumph linger. It stirred its pot, brewing blizzards from nowhere that rolled in like uninvited relatives, horizons devoured in a whiteout swirl where sea and sky fused into one howling void, the world reduced to a pocket of wind-whipped survival. Picture it unfurling, the first flakes, fat and lazy, dancing tentative like confetti at a somber party, then thickening to a curtain that muffled sounds to cotton soft, the temperature plummeting through sub-zero like a stone in still water, gales clawing up from 30 knots to a frenzy that bent grown hunters double, flinging snow horizontal in sheets that stung like nettles dipped in ice. It blurred everything, landmarks swallowed whole, the Big Dipper's outline smudged to a ghostly smear overhead, Polaris a mere suggestion winking through the frenzy, leaving you to navigate by feel alone, the tug of wind on your parka's hood your only compass in the chaos. Modern aside, think whiteout driving on a Midwest highway, but strip away the wipers, heat, and radio. Now add family, harpoons, and the knowledge that one wrong step pitches you into a crevasse that laughs last. Mainstream records from coastal middens along the Alaskan shore paint the picture clear. These early migrants, hitting land around 3000 BC, faced katabatic winds, those gravity-fueled monsters plunging off inland glaciers that could strip flesh from bone in hours, forcing hasty camps where snow walls rose overnight, built with shovels of ivory and backs bent against the blast, the gale's howling dirges that echoed the Strait's farewell. It was endurance distilled, huddling in snow-blocked lean-tos that creaked like old ships, the air inside thick with the press of bodies, and the reek of wet woolens steaming over blubber lamps that guttered low, flames fighting for life in draughts that snuck through every crack. Flesh bore the brunt cheeks blackened with windburn that peeled later like bad sunburn, fingers and toes numb to phantom throbs, the cold a thief-stealing sensation bit by bit until you poked a toe and wondered if it was still there. Spirit, too, clawed at. The isolation amplified, voices lost in the roar, turning a group trek into solitary vigils, where doubt whispered louder than the storm. Turn back, dig in, pray to the Dipper for dawn. Sensory immersion, at its rawest, the gale's roar a constant tinnitus in your ears, muffling heartbeats to dull thuds, snow gusting into eyes that watered frozen tears, lashes clumping like brittle lace, the taste of blood from cracked lips salted by spray from a hasty melt pot, sipped scalding from horn mugs that burned palms numb. You'd burrow deeper, piling hides in layers that smelled of salt and sweat, and seal oil's greasy comfort. The wind's whine pitching high as a kettle's scream when it scoured the camp's edge, flinging loose gear in tantrums that scattered mittens like fleeing mice. And the dark, it deepened the storm's spite. Nights endless, under cloud-choked skies where stars hid like cowards, leaving only the faint glow of auroras, when they deigned to show pulsing green veins across the black, a mocking reminder of the guides you'd left behind in clearer climes. Quirky fringe flavor to cut the chill, whispered in some Yupik tales pieced from later lore. These blizzards weren't mere weather, but sky beasts, ravenous winds born from jealous glaciers that devoured the unwary, only appeased by offerings of carved ivory tossed into the maelstrom tiny star maps, they say, to bribe the horizon back into view. One account has a waylaid party carving a dipper from tusk mid-squall, hurling it skyward. The gale hushed, and dawn broke, with the peace returned at their feet, etched finer. Superstition with a sparkle, or clever psych-out for frayed nerves? Either way, it turned terror into theatre. A game of cosmic chicken played with bone and bravado. Historians still argue whether these storms spurred the migrants' rapid inland push or slowed it to a crawl. Did the blizzards act as brutal filters, weeding out the hesitant and honing the hardy? Or were they navigable lulls that allowed cultural blooms in sheltered coves? Carbon-dated hearths tilt toward the former, migration patterns the latter. But the debate adds that foggy intrigue, like peering through the squall itself for glimmers of truth, through the fury they pressed. Not in blind charge, but calculated crawls. Scouts on snowshoes laced with sinew that whispered over drifts. Probing ahead with poles that thunked hollow warnings of thin crusts. The group stringing out in human chains. voices linked by raw-throated calls, hold, crevasse, that cut the gale like knives. Endurance tested in the mundane, rationing blubber chunks that melted slow on tongues. Gone wooden, their oily warmth a fleeting hug against the hollow gnaw, wrapping faces in scarves of ground squirrel fur that itched but insulated, muffling breaths to steamy sighs. Kids, bundled to immobility, rode on parents' backs in slings that swayed rhythmic, their weight a grounding anchor amid the disorientation, small hands clutching amulets of etched shell that promised, "This too shall pass." Like the Strait's waves, the clawing went deeper than skin, scraping at the soul's edges, moments when the whiteout's anonymity bred a creeping aloneness. Even in company, the storm's howl mocking your smallness, turning resolve to jelly until a shared joke pierced the pall. Laughter, that defiant spark. When a gust toppled a snow wall, burying a hunter up to his hood, his muffled yelp, auditioning for Yeti, drew snorts that warmed cheeks more than any fire, the crew digging him out with slaps on the back that said, "We're in this blizzard together, brother." Or the time a kid's mitt flew off, chasing it a futile comedy of flapping arms till it vanished, earning the quip, "Let it go, it's got better horizons anyway." And the third, soft as settling snow. Why did the gale break up with the tundra? Said it was too grounded. Needed someone who could really blow hot and cold. Chuckles huddled close. Embers against the encroaching night. Yet the gales yielded, grudging, to persistence. Faint thaws where sun pierced like a hesitant smile. Melting crusts to slush that sucked at boots like greedy mouths, but revealing game trails ptarmigan tracks like hieroglyphs in the white. Caribou scrapes promising meat on the morrow. Camps reformed in lee of ridges that broke the wind's spite. Fires coaxed from damp tinder, with flints that spark stubborn. The smoke rising in defiant plumes to taunt the clouds. Spirit mended in the hush after. When the storm's roar faded to a grumble, horizons creeping back like shy apologies, the land unfolding in folds of blue-shadowed drifts that invited onward, Polaris peaked again. Smug survivor, the dipper dipping its arc as if to say, "Told you so, follow the paw, fools." These devoured horizons weren't roadblocks but rights, clawing away the superfluous to reveal the steel beneath, flesh and spirit tempered in the gale's forge, until the treks felt less like ordeal and more like conversation with the wild. Families knit tighter, stories seeded in the storms, lullabies, verses of winds that whispered warnings, of stars that shone through squalls like old friends crashing the party. The tundra's heart beckoned now, sub-zero scars, badges of the bold, and with each cleared drift, the claim on Arctic lands grew surer, blizzards mere chapters in the epic of those who danced with the devourer and lived to sing its tune. Those storm-lulled verses weren't the end of the chorus. They were the bridge to the real refrain, the frozen treks that clawed inland from the Bering's gravelly kiss, where the tundra unfolded like a rumpled bedsheet, vast and unforgiving, riddled with crevasses that yawned silent as forgotten graves, waiting for a misstep to claim their due. Post-crossing, with boats beached and bellies rumbling from rations stretched thin as the ice crust underfoot, the migrants traded paddles for poles, umiaks for sleds lashed from whalebone and willow, pushing into Alaska's frozen heart, where every league was a negotiation with eternity itself. One wrong crunch of snow, and you'd slip into the blue-veined maw of a fissure, embraced forever in crystalline hush, your last breath a fleeting fog in the void. Armed? Hardly the stuff of legend's steel. It was ingenuity's quiet arsenal harpoons tipped with chipped stone that doubled as ice picks, snowshoes woven from caribou sinew that whispered over drifts like ghosts on tiptoe, and an unyielding will forged in Siberia's fires, now tempered to a blade that cut through doubt as cleanly as through blubber. The air up here hummed with peril's hush, the wind's low moan a constant companion that carried the faint, a clean scent of untouched snow, mingled with the sharper tang of exertion sweat freezing mid-drop on brows furrowed deep. Sensory siege from the start. The snow's surface yielding soft underfoot at first, a deceptive pillow that sucked at mucklucks with wet smacks, then hardening to a crust that shattered brittle under weight, sending shards tinkling like broken glass in the still, each step a gamble, echoed by the thud of your heart against ribs chilled to ivory. Breath plumed in ragged clouds that hung lazy before shattering on the breeze, tasting metallic on lips chapped raw. While the cold crept insidious, starting at extremities and marching inward like an uninvited guest, numbing toes to distant throbs that promised gangrene's sly hello if you lingered too long in one spot. Horizons here weren't devoured by blizzards alone. They stretched mocking, featureless white, relieved only by the occasional hummock or wind-sculpted sastrugi. Those wavy ridges like frozen ocean swells that tripped the unwary, sending you sprawling into powder that filled nostrils with its dry, choking kiss. Modern aside, it's like cross-country skiing in a winter wonderland. If you swapped hot cocoa for harpoon hauls and added the thrill of, is that solid ground or a one-way ticket to the underworld? Every dawn, such as it was, a pale smear on the sky's edge brought the same ritual, shaking frost from sleeping firs that crackled like parchment, the acrid bite of urine steam hitting the snow as you relieved the night's press, a stark reminder that life insisted, even here. Mainstream archaeology, sifting through those ancient camps, dotting the Brooks Range foothills, lays it out plain. Around 3000 BC, these trekkers mastered the art of overland migration, with dog teams, early huskies, those fluffy enigmas with eyes like blue ice chips, pulling travois loaded with tents of oiled hide and caches of dried salmon that flaked salty on the tongue, their yips a cheerful counterpoint to the silence. It was ingenuity incarnate, probing crevasses with harpoon lines weighted by stone sinkers, the rope humming taut as you leaned over, edges that dropped sheer into abyssal blue, the faint echo of dripping water far below a siren's song of jump. Willpower showed in the relays, scouts fanning ahead to test routes, marking safe paths with urine spray cairns that froze yellow flags in the wind, while the main group leapfrogged caches, burying meat in permafrost pits ringed with boulders to baffle foxes with noses like divining rods. One slip, not just personal apocalypse. It rippled, lightening loads but lightening hearts too. A brother lost to the ices, grip turning song somber, the trek a funeral march disguised as progress. The treks weren't linear marches. They meandered with the lands, moods, skirting polywogs of off-ice, those treacherous overflow ices from spring melts, refrozen into death traps that mirrored the sky so perfectly you'd swear it was solid till your foot punched through, plunging calf-deep into the chill bath below. Ingenuity shone in the fixes, bridging narrow gaps with sled runners laid span-like, or fashioning snow bridges by treading paths till the crust bore weight, the creak of settling flakes your only warning. Unyielding will? It lived in the evenings, when camps rose from nothing, snow trenches scooped with shoulders and euless, walls patted smooth against wind's probe, roofs of hides stretched over frames that sagged under fresh dumps, the interior a womb of dim warmth where blubber lamps cast golden pools, shadows waltzing to the pop of melting fat. Huddled there, the press of kin, a bulwark against the outer howl, you'd share broth simmered from marrow bones, its greasy heat sliding down throats raw from wind's rasp, steam curling up to fog the low ceiling like communal breath made visible. Quirky fringe to thaw the toes, some tales from the Unangan edges, those Aleut cousins who traded yarns across the gulf, spin of ice, whispers, crevasses that hummed tunes to lure the weary, melodies mimicking lost loved ones' calls, only silenced by spitting tobacco juice into the crack. A gritty offering that clogged the throat of the void. One legend has a hunter teetering on eternity's lip, hawking a loogie laced with caribou fat, the hum choked to gurgles, and an updraft tossed him safe, harpoon in hand. Eccentric? Sure, but in the mind's whiteout, who wouldn't spit at shadows for a laugh? Historians still argue whether these treks were clan-wide odysseys or splintered ventures. Did families stick tight in mega-migrations that braided cultures early? Or did lone bands fan out like seeds on the wind, innovating tools in isolation till they reconverged? Thule culture echoes suggest the former, with shared harpoon styles spanning coasts. Dorset outliers the latter, but the tussle keeps the past's edges sharp, like a fresh-whittled spear. Will bent but rarely broke. Moments of mutiny when blizzards pinned you days in a drift-buried tent. The world outside a muffled tomb, rations dwindling to leather-tough pemmican that stuck teeth like glue, the gnaw of hunger, a hollow drum in the gut. Yet ingenuity answered, snaring ptarmigan with new snares baited on willow twigs, their feathers molting white for winter camo that made them ghosts in the snow, or chewing willow bark for Salison's feverish bite against the cold's creeping ache. Kids, those tiny troopers, learned on the fly, fashioning slings from gut scraps to hurl snowballs at foxes for practice, their giggles piercing the pall like sun through cloud, turning drudgery to drill. Elders, with eyes milky but maps in their minds, called halts at auspicious stars, Polaris dipping just so, signalling safe hollow ahead, their croaks cutting doubt like a well-aimed throw. The eternal embrace loomed closest in the river crossings, where braided channels hid under snow veils, currents murmuring murder beneath. Harpoons became lifelines, flung to anchor on snags upstream, the pull of water testing sinew till arms quivered like bowstrings. Clans hauling each other over in human chains that swayed precarious. Water's roar, thunderous applause for survival's tightrope. One slipper boot snagged on submerged root. The crack of ice like a snapped wishbone. And eternity tugged, cold fingers closing on ankles. The scream swallowed by splash. Ropes thrown frantic till hands bled raw on the haft. But will prevailed. The lost pulled, gasping to bank, wrapped in furs that steamed like grateful ghosts, the group collapsing in a heap of limbs and laughter, the crevasses' threat reduced to a scar on the soul, a tale to etch on bone tools for the next generation. Laughter, that unyielding sparkler. When a sled tipped into a drift, spilling gear in a comedic cascade, the driver's groan, "My life's work, buried in fluff," sparked snickers that echoed off walls. The unpacker group grope fest that bonded tighter than blood, or the hunter who harpooned his own shadow, yanking back a puff of snow, finally caught that sneaky bastard, drawing hoots that warmed the watch. And the third, whisper soft, "Why did the crevasse break up with the trekker?" It said, "You're too deep for me, always probing, never committing. Let it linger, a feather in the freeze." These treks against eternity weren't conquests, so much as conversations land, and people haggling terms, harpoons the punctuation, ingenuity the prose, will the unbreakable spine. Families emerged leaner, lore richer, the tundra's white pages filling with their prints, faint but fervent, leading toward footholds. Where communities would root, the ice's embrace denied. Destiny's threads pulled taut toward Alaskan hearths aglow. Those faint but fervent prints on the tundras, white pages deepened into deliberate strokes as the trekkers crested the last ridge of wind-sculpted drifts, the Alaskan wild unfurling below like a rumpled map drawn in blues and whites, fjords fingering inland from a coast that jagged sharp against the sea's relentless lap. It wasn't a promised land of milk and honey, no. More like a canvas of caribou moss and willow scrub, raw and reluctant, waiting for hands collused by harpoons to coax it into shape, transforming the endless chill into footholds that whispered hours against the wind's indifferent sigh. Families fanned out from the crevasse-scarred trails, eyes scanning for the lands, subtle nods a hollow shielded from gales by a granite outcrop, or a stream's murmur promising fresh water under its icy lid, dropping packs with thuds that echoed finality, the air here carrying a crisper bite, laced with the piney whisper of spruce groves huddling low against the frost. Bone tools clattered free, hides unrolled like hopeful banners, and communal fires sparked to life with flints kissing tinder in showers of sparks that danced brief as fireflies in the dusk, their smoke curling upward, like questions posed to the returning stars. Polaris, you old sentinel, approve this spot? Establishing outposts wasn't a weekend stakeout. It was a slow seduction of the soil, weaving homes from the wild's own thread, sod-roofed barabaras half buried in the earth like shy badgers, walls of driftwood and whalebone lashed with gut that stretched taut as a drumskin. The interior's a cozy warren where the ground stored warmth fought back the night's bite, floors strewn with rush mats that rustled soft underfoot, scented with the faint, green tang of summer's fleeting gift. Sensory immersion from the get-go. The scrape of ulu blades carving sod blocks that crumbled loamy in your palms. Cool and claggy like wet clay from a childhood riverbank. The rhythmic thump of mallets driving stakes into permafrost that resisted with a grudging crunch, each blow vibrating up arms numb from the cold. The first fires crackle blooming to a roar. Heat blooming on cheeks flushed from effort. The smoke's acrid kiss mingling with the melt of snow in iron pots that hissed steam thick as fog, broth bubbling with chunks of seal that bobbed like dark islands in the savory sea. Modern aside, it's like glamping gone rogue, no Airbnb reviews. Just the land's terse like in the form of a ptarmigan wandering too close, eyeing your setup like, new neighbours, fine, but don't cramp my malt. Mainstream excavations along the Bering Sea's Alaskan flank tell the tale straight. By 3000 BC, these pioneers had dotted the coast with seasonal villages, clusters of 10 to 20 dwellings, ringed by meat caches on elevated racks to thwart the wolverine's sly raids, where communal hunts organized around the solstices, skimpy light, bow drills boring into ivory for hooks that snagged salmon runs thick as silver rivers, the halls smoked over alder branches that lent a sweet, smoky veil to the air, preserving plenty for the lean moons ahead. It was transformation in motion. Raw tundra, tamed by trench gardens scratched into south-facing slopes, where dwarf willow shoots were coaxed to berry under careful weeding with bone rakes. The harvest a tart burst on tongues weary of pemmican's chew. Fires weren't just warmth, they were anchors, ringed by stones blackened from season's use, where elders portioned shares with quiet equity. The flames glow, etching faces in amber light, turning strangers into kin over tales that bridged the strait they'd crossed. The weave of bone and hide went soul-deep, whale ribs arching overhead like cathedral vaults in the grandest Quagik. The communal gathering house where drums thrummed low during feasts, their beat syncing with heartbeats quickened by dance, feet stomping rhythms on packed earth floors that echoed the earth's own pulse. Hides, stretched and stitched into door flaps that flapped gentle in the breeze, muffled the outer world's whine. Inside a haven of layered furs caribou for the plush underlay, sealskin for the waterproof top that cradled bodies through the endless dark, the faint creak of settling sod overhead a lullaby of security. Communal? Utterly the outpost pulsed with shared labour. Women tanning hides in vats of brain tallow slurry that sloshed viscous. Their chatter, a counterpoint to the men's, spear shaft whittling by the fire, shavings curling like question marks into the embers. Kids scampered the fringes, gathering lichens for dye or moss for tinder. Their laughter a bright thread in the tapestry, turning toil to tradition. Quirky fringe to add a twinkle to the toil. Some coastal lore, etched in later petroglyphs that mimic those early sites. Spins yarns of land, songs, melodies, hummed while staking homes, vibration said to wake the spirits in the soil, making the ground yield easier, like whispering sweet nothings to a grumpy boulder. One fringe account has a barabara builder warbling a dipper ditty during a stubborn sod cut. The earth parted smoother than butter, and the dwelling stood gale-proof for generations. Eccentric earth magic, or just the power of a good groove to loosen muscles? In the wild's embrace, who'd argue belt out a tune next time you're pitching a tent, see if the stakes sink sweeter? Historians still argue whether these footholds were permanent routes or way stations. On a westward wander did the migrants settle swift, birthing the Norton culture's toolkits in isolated bliss? Or were they fluid foragers, outposts popping like bubbles as clans chased caribou herds? Artifact clusters lean settled, migration models nomadic, but the debate simmers like stew on those communal coals, flavoring the past with maybe. As outposts took root, the wild pushed back, playful at first, foxes pilfering drying fish with yips that mocked from the dark, winds toppling half-built walls in overnight tantrums that scattered tools like offended sprites. But ingenuity answered. Elevated caches on four-legged racks that swayed but stood, woven from sinew nets that deterred all but the boldest raven raids. Their glossy eyes, watching from perches like feathered critics, will shone in the men's ripped hides, patched with lozenge-shaped inserts, so neat. The scars becoming stories. Ah, that gale from the Strait's ghost. Remember? Communal fires knit it all, their light a beacon drawing wanderers from afar, where songs rose soft, verses of star-crossed voyages blending with new chants of berry blooms and bay hunts, the smoke carrying prayers upward, the threading destinies loom with threads of belonging, laughter wove in too, light as willow fluff. When a new outpost's fire smoked so thick it choked the builders, one quipped, "Great, our first fog machine now wears the light show," drawing cough-laced guffaws that cleared the air better than any fan. Or the time a caribou antler stake boomeranged back, bonking its driver. Guess the Tundra's saying, "Not in my backyard," or is it "Welcome home"? And the third, a sleepy snicker. Why did the Alaskan foothold throw a party? To celebrate finally getting its roots down. Turns out, the Tundra's a tough crowd, but the fires make great icebreakers. Let 'em flicker out gentle, warming the weave. These footholds weren't conquests stamped in stone. They were claims coaxed, bone and hide homes rising like defiant flowers from the frost. Communal fires, the heart's steady throb. Families settled into rhythms. Dawn probes for eggs in willow thickets that scratched welcoming. Dusk gatherings where shadows lengthened soft. Stories spilling like broth from the pot. The wild's embrace softened to a hold. Horizons no longer devours but draws, pulling toward greener fjords and far-flung kin. The first verses of Greenland's call humming faint in the wind. Starlit paths unfurling onward. Those faint hums in the wind weren't idle breezes. They were the siren song of fjords, far to the east, carved deep by glaciers, patient chisels, calling across the Arctic's frozen quilt, with a pull that turned Alaskan footholds into launch pads for yet another leap. Relentless voyages that threaded skin boats through pack ice labyrinths, stitching the vast white from Alaska's rugged shores to Greenland's sheer cliffs, into a cultural tapestry as intricate as the stars that guided every stitch. Generations on from the Strait's gamble, with outposts now humming with the chatter of children born under Alaskan skies, clans felt the tug anew, not famine's whip, but the quiet itch of expansion, whispers of untouched bays where seals basked unmolested and caribou grazed in valleys untouched by prior feet. Boats, those faithful vessels of fate from Siberian sands, were coaxed back to life. Hides oiled fresh with blubber that gleamed slick in the midnight sun's skim, frames reinforced with ivory pegs carved in idle evenings. The air around the beaches thick with the salty reek of rendering fat and the low thrum of chants invoking safe waters. Polaris, your unflappable captain. The dipper, your dipping ladle for the sea's endless soup. The push onward was no straight shot. It was a mosaic of migrations. Umiaks slicing through the Chukchi and Beaufort seas' summer thaws. where ice floes drifted like lazy continents, bumping hulls with dull thuds that vibrated up your spine like the land's grumpy hello. Picture the launch from those Alaskan coves. Waves lapping gravel with a rhythmic hush that masked the undercurrents. Sly drag. Families piling aboard with sleds nested like Russian dolls, the weight making the gunwales bite water low, paddles dipping in unison to a cadence called by the steerwomen's. Voices strong as the tide. Heave to the Bear's Ark, echoing the star lore that now spanned shores. The Big Dipper wheeling overhead like an approving uncle at a family reunion. Sensory swirl from the off. Spray misting your hood in fine veils that beaded cold on skin, still warm from shore fires. The creak of lashings settling under load like old bones protesting a hike. The faint, fishy tang of baited lines trailing astern to snag halibut that thrashed silver in the hold. There slaps a percussive underscore to the voyage's ballad. Modern aside, it's like an Arctic road trip. If you swapped the RV for a sealskin RV and the playlist for whale song harmonies, scenic, sure, but with zero cell service and a very real chance of your scenery ramming your bumper. Mainstream timelines from Thule culture sites, those Dorset successor villages dotting the high Arctic, pin these expansions around 1000 AD, though echoes of earlier probes linger in the tools. Harpoons with toggling heads that flip to anchor in blubber, ensuring the kill stuck even in a seal's death dive. The tech traded along coastal chains like gossip at a market, allowing clans to vault from Alaska's bays to Ellesmere Islands, grim outposts in seasonal hops that knit the north into a web of way stations. It was relentless rhythm. Summer melts, opening leads through the pack, boats poling through slush that clotted oars like sticky jam. Then autumn freezes, locking flows into highways, for dog sled relays that hauled gear over hummocks, paws punching crust with muffled crunches. The colds bite, sharpening to a knife edge as nights lengthened. Auroras draping the sky in veils of green silk that lit the trail like nature's own runway. Communities founded in the fjords weren't dropped whole. They budded gradual. Scouts wintering in snow houses that domed pristine. Walls translucent enough to filter dawn's blush into rosy glows inside, where the air hung heavy with the melt of snow for tea, sipped scalding from soapstone lamps that doubled as cookpots, their soapstone warmth seeping into palms like a friend's handclasp. The fjords of Greenland welcomed with a double-edged blade, cliffs plunging sheer into waters teeming with narwhal pods that spiraled like living corkscrews, their tusks glinting mythic under the low sun, but gales funneling down the inlets with howls that shredded tents and souls alike, forcing homes into the rock's clefts. Barabaras burrowed deeper than their Alaskan kin, turf walls, thick as a man's arm to rebuff the Atlantic's spite. Sensory poetry in the settling. The fjords water-lapping, dock-like against pebble strands with a glassy clink. Air laced with a crisp ozone of carving bergs that thundered distant like applause from the gods. The grind of ice on hulls, a low growl that set teeth on edge, as boats nosed into sheltered coves. Unloading with splashes that echoed off the walls, pieds flapping wet in the breeze that carried the wild thyme scent from upland meadows. Rare green flecks in the white. Communal fires here took on new sanctity, ringed by slate slabs that held heat like grudges. Flames fed with willow twists that snapped aromatic, drawing kin from scattered hunts to share tales that bridged the ice. Remember the Strait's fog? This fjord's but a fjord fog, cousin milder than mother's stew. Stitching the tapestry meant more than muscle. It was lore lashed to land, songs evolving with the seascape verses of spiraling whales added to the star-crossing chants. Hummed low, while carving umiak ribs from driftwood beached by Labrador currents. The wood's salt-etched grain yielding under adzes with curls that flew like seagull cries. Far-flung communities bloomed in this weave. Villages strung like beads on the fjord's necklace. Each a node of trade where ivory toggles swapped for copper nuggets. From Baffin drifts, the barters sealed with feasts of matak raw whaleskin, that crunched fresh and briny, its chew a test of trust. Juices bursting like secrets on the tongue. Relentless voyages knit it tight. Winter kayaks slipping silent through refrozen leads for scouting. Blades whispering water that lapped black and star-speckled. Returning with maps in memory, turn at the third berg, where the dipper kisses the cliff, guiding the spring armadas that swelled the outposts, turning lone huts into hamlets alive with drum circles under the midnight glow, beats pulsing like the earth's hidden heart. Quirky fringe to fringe the fjords. Some Greenlandic sagas, inked from oral wisps. Murmur of ice threads. Invisible lines spun by shamans from aurora silk. Tugged during voyages to pull safe paths through storms. The weaver's humming dipper dirges to strengthen the strands. One yarn has a lead umiak snagged in a gale, the navigator plucking an aurora strand mid-chant. The wind hushed, and the boat arrowed true to a hidden cove teeming with game. Mythic whimsy, or mnemonic for memorizing routes. In the fjord's echo, who'd not weave a whisper for luck? Historians still argue whether these voyages were driven by climates, nudge the medieval warm period's thaw, opening doors, or cultural momentum. Clans pulsing outward like a heartbeat of curiosity. Pollen cores suggest the warmth. Artifact flows the wanderlust, but the tussle tugs like those ice threads, elusive as fog on the water. The relentless push softened in the fjord's fold, communities rooting with a sigh. Kids racing pebble shores with whoops that bounced off cliffs. Elders etching clan marks on soapstone lamps that glowed heirloom warm. The tapestry's stitches holding against the gales that probed like nosy neighbours. Laughter laced the labour. When a berg carved so close it showered the camp in spray. One quipped, "Baptism by ice now were official fjord folk, dripping with destiny, drawing splutters that turned to belly laughs, robes wrung out in communal puddles." Or the kayaker who mistook a walrus for a rock, harpoon glancing off tusk. Well, that moustache put up a fight next time. Shave first. And the third a fjord-faint chuckle. Why did the Greenland voyage throw a welcome party? To toast the cliffs they're steep. But they've got great views on commitment. Let it echo soft, settling like snow on the weave. These far-flung foundations weren't endpoints. They were expansions. The Arctic's quilt-patched boulder. Fjords flowing with the hum of lives lashed to the lands. Rhythm boats bobbing in the bays like promises kept. Stars wheeling witness to the songs that now span seas. Threads of destiny drawing tighter toward the epic verses waiting in the night. Those threads of destiny, drawn taut across the fjord's echoing folds, didn't fray in the telling, they wove tighter in the hush of igloo interiors, where the lamp's soft glow pooled like molten amber on snowblock walls that curved intimate as a secret shared in the dark. The air heavy with the sweet, greasy melt of whale oil feeding flames that danced lazy, casting shadows that flickered like half-remembered dreams. Around these humble hearths, in the long night's cradle when wind scratched futile at the dome's seamless white, the epic songs unfurled, not scribbled on scrolls or chiseled in stone, but breathed alive in voices gravelly from salt and storm, unraveling the oral tapestries that preserved the starlit voyages as living lore. Melodies that lulled the weary to sleep, while etching the journeys deep into the soul's quiet corners, threads of migration humming eternal in the rhythm of breath and beat. Elders, faces creased like ancient maps under hoods fringed with fox fur that tickled noses with its musky whisper, would lean forward, eyes half-lidded but sharp as harpoon tips, drawing the circle close with a nod that said, "Listen now," for the stars sang first, the first notes rising low, a throaty murmur that blended with the lamp's gentle hiss, pulling listeners into the current like a boat slipping its moorings. The unraveling was ritual. No casual campfire yarn spinning, but a sacred unspooling. Songs structured in verses that mirrored the dipper's poor stanza for the Siberian cradle. Swell for the Strait's gamble, crescendo in the blizzard's claw, each refrain a callback to the paths star-mapped in memory. sung in the Inuktitut tongues, that rolled rich with uvula trills and vowel hums that vibrated in your chest like the sea's distant thunder, sensory seduction at its sleepiest. The igloo's chill nipping at bare ankles, where the sleeping platform of packed snow met the raised bench of hides and moss, soft and springy under shifting weight, the air tasting faintly of charred lichen from the morning's tea, while the song's cadence wove warmth from words alone, voices layering in harmony, the deep bass of grandfathers rumbling like carving bergs, altos of aunts lilting like wind over waves, the collective breath fogging the low ceiling in a communal cloud that settled like a blanket of mist. Modern aside, it's ASMR gold, this aural orchestra, no Spotify shuffle, just the raw remix of history's hits, where the bass drop is a verse about dodging crevasses, and the fade-out's a yawn that says, "Carry it on, little one." Mainstream ethnographies, pieced from recordings in the early 20th century, but echoing millennia back, confirm the epic's backbone. The Pisik and other narrative songs of the Inuit, composed in layered couplets that encoded navigation lore Polaris, as the unchanging one anchoring choruses, the Big Dipper's arc timing the swells passed matrilineally around those igloo lamps, their flames fed just enough to outlast the tale, preserving not just facts but the feel of the freeze, the fear and fire of the first crossings around 3000 BC, now sung as if the Strait still lapped at the door. It was preservation's poetry, verses tallying the Umiak's lash counts for seaworthiness, refrains mimicking paddle dips to teach rhythm to the young, who sat cross-legged in the circle, mittened hands tracing air maps on their laps, the song's lilt seeping in like osmosis, turning history to heartbeat. Unraveling deeper, the epics weren't linear logs but spiraling sagas, threads looping back on themselves. Like the aurora's veils, a hunter's solo kayak drift in the Chukchi's snarl, becoming metaphor for the soul's solo trek through spirit ice, sung with gestures that painted the air, arms sweeping wide for horizons devoured, fingers pinching tight for harpoon grips that snagged eternity's hem. Around the lamp's glow, the circle shifted subtle, bodies leaning in as the melody dipped to whispers. For the intimate losses, a child slipped to the crevasses. Hush, voice cracking on the line that named the stars witnesses, then swelling triumphant on the communal haul back from the brink, the harmony a balm that knit grief to grit, quirky fringe to fringe the flames. Some lesser-told cycles, whispered in outlying Greenland hamlets, hint at song stars' constellations that sang back during voyages, their twinkles pulsing to the paddler's chant, only heard by those with the gift, like a cosmic call and response, where botching the reply summoned squalls. One fringe fragment has a navigator, adrift off Ellesmere, belting a dipper dirge. The stars twinkled Morse-like, guiding him to a walrus hall that fed his clan a winter. Celestial karaoke? Or auditory hallucination from hypothermia, in the igloo's hush? Who'd not hum along for the harmony? Historians still argue whether these epics crystallized pre-migration in Siberian hearths, or evolved en route. Adapting verses like boats to new seas, did the starlit core form in the old world's caves, or bloom in the news fjords, with refrains riffing on local beasts like the narwhal's unicorn twist? Linguistic layers pull toward evolution, motif matches toward antiquity. But the debate drifts like smoke from the lamp, hazy and hypnotic, inviting you to lean closer, ear to the ember. The melodies lulled as they lingered, tempos slowing with the night's deepening, verses trailing into half-sung sighs that blurred the line between song and sleep, the elder's voice fading to a rumble that synced with the wind's outer sigh, leaving the threads to settle in dreams. Voyages revisited in slumber's soft edit, where blizzards blew balmier and straits parted easier, the stars dipping low to touch the brow. Generations carried it thus. A mother's croon to her babe in the Umiak's sway, threading destiny's tune through the rock of waves. a father's growl by the Alaskan fire, unraveling the crevasse dodge for wide-eyed scouts. The lamps flicker etching lines on young faces that would one day lead the circle. It was the epic's quiet power, this oral alchemy turning the raw rub of migration into melody's silk, preserving not just paths but the pulse of perseverance, the whisper of wonder that said, "We crossed because the stars called," and the song answered. Laughter, ever the song's sly counterpoint, slipped in like a rogue rhyme. When a verse tangled mid-refrain, the singer's mock grumble, "Blast, the dippers dipped too deep tonight," sparked chuckles that rippled the circle. Mittens clapping soft to reset the rhythm, turning flub to family lore, or the time a kid chimed in off-key on the Strait's swell, voice cracking high. "Sounds like the wind's jealous, better belt it louder," or "It'll steal the show," drawing snorts that warmed the igloo better than extra blubber. And the third, a drowsy dimple. Why did the epic song break up with the igloo? Said it was too enclosed, needed space to really unravel under the stars. Let it trail off, a giggle glow in the gloom. These starlit paths, unraveled around lamps that guttered low as the last notes, weren't dusty relics but living looms, threads of voyage humming through the generations, hushed, lulling to sleep with the promise that the bold claims on Arctic edges endured not in stone, but in song's endless echo. Destiny's melody, a cradle rocking you toward the worlds, whispered triumphs, where even the void sings back soft. Those endless echoes of the epic's final fade didn't vanish into the igloos, melting walls with the dawn's first blush. They lingered like frost lace on a window pane, tracing patterns across the Arctic's vast canvas, where the bold claims of star-navigated souls still ripple soft through time's quiet currents, whispering humanity's unassuming victories over the frozen voids that once seemed bent on swallowing the world whole. Picture it now, in the hush of a Greenland summer where the sun dips but never drowns, casting long shadows over fjord-side villages that have stood sentinel for millennia, their turf-roofed homes sagging gentle under mossy blankets, the air humming with the distant low of ravens circling thermals, carrying on their wings the faint, salty memory of straits crossed and tundras tamed. These legacies aren't monuments of marble or museum's dust. They're the living breath in the descendants who paddle kayaks etched with the same sinew lashings, gaze at Polaris with the same knowing squint, their lives a seamless stitch in the tapestry. Those first migrants wove, bold, yes, but humble as the snowflakes fall, turning ice's indifference into a shared story of "we made it" against the odds and the endless white. The enduring hum shows in the everyday graces. Coastal communities from gnomes, gravel beaches to Nuke's harbour lights, where elders teach star lore, not as relic but routine. Kids tracing the dipper's arc on foggy windows with chubby fingers that smudge the glass like signatures on a family deed. The knowledge a quiet currency traded in whispers over mugs of hot Labrador tea that steams herbal and soothing, easing the chill of modern winters that pale beside their forebears. Sensory echoes abound, the creak of a snowshoe on fresh powder, echoing the trek's tentative crunches, the sizzle of seal fat, rendering in a pan, its rich perfume a bridge to those first footholds fires, the night sky's velvet drape, stars pricking through like old friends at a reunion. Polaris steady as ever, reminding you that some guides outlast the gales. Modern aside, in our GPS-gilded age, it's a sly sarcasm from the cosmos. Why bother with satellites when a dipper full of light got you across Bering's Bight? These triumphs aren't loud anthems. They're the soft satisfaction of knowing your roots run deep as permafrost, unthawing just enough to nourish the now. Mainstream histories, from the Smithsonian's vaults to the latest digs in the Yupik heartlands, affirm the legacy's span. The Thule people's innovations, those toggling harpoons and snowhouse domes, rippled into the Inuit cultures that thrive today, adapting to climates that shifted like moods. From the Little Ice Age's squeeze to today's wary thaw, their resilience a fact as solid as the ivory carvings unearthed, bearing motifs of boats under starry sails that say, "We claimed this edge and held it." It's in the languages still sung, the Inupiaq and Kalaalai Sut, tongues curling around words for journey, that carry the straits, salt, or the festivals like the Greenlandic summer solstice dances, feet stamping rhythms that mimic paddle strokes, circles of hands linked against a chill that's more memory than menace. But let's lean into a quirky tidbit to tickle the twilight. Fringe whispers from some shamanic scrolls, pieced in modern retellings, speak of star debts, the notion that every voyage borrows light from the heavens, repaid in dreams where ancestors paddle back to check on kin, leaving gifts like sudden caribou sightings or calm seas after storms. One tale, half told in a Baffin elder's yarn, has a 21st century hunter dreaming of a Siberian great-grandpa who gifts a forgotten harpoon design that snags the season's biggest narwhal. Call it cosmic karma, or just the mind's way of keeping the ledger balanced with a wink. Eccentric, sure, but in a world of voids, who wouldn't welcome a starry IOU settled with supper? Historians still argue whether this legacy's quiet triumphs owe more to adaptation's luck, or the migrants' innate grit did the stars merely point, with climate and chance doing the heavy lift, or was it the unyielding thread of cultural will that turned voids to villages? DNA strands and tool timelines tug both ways, but the debate drifts gentle, like aurora wisps, leaving room for the wonder. Perhaps it's both. A dance of fate and fire. As the echoes settle, you feel it, these journeys' whispers aren't conquests, crowing from peaks, but murmurs from the margins. Humanity's hand extended into the cold's clasp, emerging not unscathed but scarred beautiful, with songs that soothe the soul's own frosts. Families today, from Alaska's pipeline towns to Nunavut's remote outposts, carry it casual. A tattoo of the dipper on a wrist that paddles tour boats, or a smartphone app charting stars that nods to grandma's cave scratches. The frozen voids, they've thawed a touch, revealing permafrost tales in melting layers. But the triumphs endure, quiet as a hearth's last ember, warm as the knowledge that bold steps once lit the way, and their light still guides. Jokes to ease the edge, light as northern mist. Why did the legacy refuse to fade? It said, "I'm not done," echoing got voids to fill, and stars to sass. All this. Ever hear the void's complaint about those migrants? They showed up uninvited, claimed the couch, and now the whole Arctic's family reunion central. And for the final flicker, what's a starlit journey's favourite bedtime story? One where the dipper dips low enough to pour you dreams sweet. No chasers. Let them linger, a soft snicker in the settling snow. These bold claims on the world's rim, navigated by needle points of light through tempests that could unmake men, stand as testament to the human hush. We ventured. We voiced it in song, and in the void's vast silence, our echoes sing on, a lullaby for the wanderers we all are, under the same wheeling sky. And now, as the last threads of those starlit sagas slip like silk through your fingers, let the pacing ease. The words stretch long and languid, wrapping around you gentle as a down quilt on a winter's eve. Feel the hush of the tundra settling in your chest, the wind's sigh fading to a breath, soft as a lover's murmur in the dark, carrying away the chill of ancient gales, leaving only the warm glow of fires long banked but never cold. You've journeyed far tonight, across straits that swallowed lesser lights, through blizzards that blurred the bold from the broken, yet here you are, safe in the weave of their triumphs, reassured that such quiet victories are woven into us all, threads of resilience humming beneath the skin, ready to guide when the voids call soft. Let the imagery fade now, fjords folding into fog, stars dimming to distant fireflies, the dippers pour slowing to a drip of dreams, each one a promise of horizons held, not by harpoons alone, but by the heart's unyielding hum. Breathe deep. Eyelids weigh like snow on boughs, the world's edge curling round you, protective, whispering, "Rest now, wanderer." The songs await the morn, sweet slumbers under Polaris' watchful wink.